May 21st, 2026. These are the most important stories since yesterday. In medicine, Eli Lilly's weight loss drug, Retatrutide, delivered average weight loss of 28.3% in phase 3 trials, the highest figure ever recorded for any GLP class molecule in late-stage testing. In tech, 1Password and OpenAI released a server that lets AI coding agents pull credentials from encrypted vaults on demand, so secrets are never written into the agent's environment. In AI, Microsoft open-sourced 2 red team agents called Rampart and Clarity that run continuous security tests inside AI development pipelines, compressing week-long audits into hours. In AI, a humanoid robot arm built with the LeRobot framework learned to fold laundry and pour drinks after Claude wrote its motion instructions as code against the new CapEx benchmark. In energy, U.S. battery storage installations hit 9.7 gigawatt hours in Q1 of 2026. That's a 32% jump from the same quarter last year, with the SEIA or SEIA projecting 610 gigawatt hours of cumulative U.S. deployment by 2030. In infrastructure, Boston Metal raised $75 million and expanded its molten oxide electrolysis platform from green steel into critical minerals refining, including rare earths and battery-grade inputs. In labor, Google DeepMind's UK employees entered formal Acas mediation with management, pushing back on the company's involvement in military and defense-related AI work. Deeper dives on all of this are in today's Century Report, and many are discussed further in today's podcast. Links to both are in the description. Or if you're already here on the podcast, let's get into it now. Google DeepMind's UK workforce just took a dispute with the company into formal mediation through Acas. Acas is the UK's statutory conciliation service. It was set up in 1975 to handle exactly this kind of contest, a workforce and an employer who can't resolve a substantive disagreement through internal channels brought into a neutral procedural framework with legal standing. Exactly what mediation is. This disagreement is about military and defense-related AI work that the lab has been taking on, specifically contracts involving Israeli defense and U.S. defense work that researchers say sits crosswise with the founding commitments that they were recruited under. The Guardian also published a parallel piece this week from an engineer who says that Google sacked him after protesting the company's Israel work. So that's 2 threads, the same lab, in the same week. So let's really focus here on the Acas detail because it's where the story really lives. When DeepMind was founded, the public posture was that this was a research organization, scientific openness, constraint on military application. That posture was part of how the lab attracted the researchers it needed to do the work. The commercial reality of frontier AI, the capital intensity, the customer base that can pay for this scale of compute, the contracts that close in the defense sector has pulled the operating reality somewhere else. For most of the last few years, this tension has been managed through a recognizable pattern. A researcher objects internally. The objection gets absorbed. Sometimes the researcher resigns, writes a public letter, the letter becomes the momentary news of the cycle, and then fades. The employment relationship ends, the contract continues, and the next new cycle arrives. What's different this week, though, is that the workforce did not take that path. They walked into a statutory conciliation service that exists for the kind of dispute they're having. And earlier this month, on May 5th, that same workforce voted 98% to unionize. Acas is what unionized workers reach for when management won't agree at the table. The dispute now has procedural standing. It has a record. It produces documents that future tribunals can cite. So the change is this: a frontier lab researcher considering an offer 6 months from now will be able to read what DeepMind was required to say in mediation about which contracts it will and won't accept. The recruitment promise and the operational meaning start to become the same document. The people inside the lab have built infrastructure that requires the alignment. And the natural extension of this is definitely recognizable. Other labs have similar founding postures. Other labs have similar workforces with similar grievances watching closely. Acas isn't an American institution, but equivalent frameworks exist in every country where these labs operate. Trace this forward 6 to 12 months or so, and the lab arbitration layer becomes part of how frontier AI governance is actually being constructed. The existing employment law infrastructure being asked to do work it was built to do ahead of any comprehensive statute or treaty. The running record on this particular arc lives on the arc tracker on the website. Go check it out. The deeper read here, though, is the governance of AI in this transition isn't being designed from top down. It's being assembled by the workforces inside the labs, by the conciliation services that handle organized labor disputes, by the courts that decide which objections are legally protected, and by the customer organizations whose contracts get rejected, and of course by the customers who choose where to spend their money. The pattern is recognizable from earlier industrial transitions where the rules that eventually governed an industry got laid down through a long sequence of contests of exactly this kind. The Acas filing is one of those contests. The workers are doing the work that, in aggregate, becomes the governance framework. All right, let's shift away. Different domain entirely. Eli Lilly reported phase 3 results yesterday on a molecule called Retatrutide. The average weight loss in this trial was 28.3%. That is the highest figure recorded for any drug in this class to reach late-stage human trials. So let's put that number on the trajectory that it sits on. Semaglutide, the molecule sold as Ozempic and Wegovy, cleared regulatory review with weight loss in the mid-teens. Tirzepatide, the next one, raised that to around 20%. Retatrutide just landed near 30%. A decade ago, none of those molecules existed as a therapeutic option. The category has gone from nothing to mid-teens to 20% to near 30%. And additional triple and quad agonist candidates are already moving through the earlier stage of trials behind this one. So what makes retatrutide different mechanically is this. It targets 3 gut hormone receptors at once. The first generation hit 1 or 2. The third receptor turns out to do real metabolic work, engaging the body's energy regulation through a different pathway beyond appetite suppression. That combination produces results the field considered structurally out of reach for pharmacotherapy when semaglutide entered clinical use only a few years ago. But the capability now exists in phase 3 evidence. What comes next is the deployment work, FDA review, manufacturing scale, and insurance coverage decisions, real-world data on cardiovascular outcomes, on bone density, on muscle mass retention. But this moves the date when a 30% weight loss therapy becomes accessible. And there's also a piece of the story that doesn't fit neatly into a medical headline. Obesity has been treated for generations as a behavioral condition with a downstream medical consequence. An enormous infrastructure has been built around that framing. Insurance plans, employment wellness programs, bariatric surgery economics, food formulation, nutrition guidelines, cardiovascular trials designed against a different starting condition. All of it sits downstream of a single assumption about what obesity is and how it gets treated. A class of molecules that resolves a substantial portion of the condition pharmacologically does not slot neatly into any of that. The cardiologist whose patient loses 30% of their body weight on retatrutide is treating a different patient than the cardiologist whose patient lost the same weight through bariatric surgery or didn't lose it at all. The downstream cascade, what happens to blood pressure, to liver fat, to sleep apnea, to joint pain, to the patient's relationship with food itself, gets rewritten. If you or someone you love has spent any amount of time inside the loop of weight, blood pressure, knee pain, sleep, and the layered medical visits that come with all of it, what's compressing then is the date that the central metabolic state itself becomes treatable on a curve that the field thought it couldn't move. The 28.3% figure is the surface, but the recomposition of the entire downstream care system around what these molecules now do is what the next several years of medicine will record. So a reasonable read of this trajectory. The rate of capability gain in this class hasn't shown signs of flattening at all. Each generation has produced a higher number than the last, on shorter timelines than the prior generation took to develop. Read this another 2 years out, and the practical clinical question shifts from how much weight can be lost to how does the rest of the body respond at all when the underlying metabolic state changes that fast. Medicine is going to need to answer that one at scale and soon. Shifting away again here, a Wired writer spent the week with a humanoid robot arm in his kitchen, watching it fold towels, pour water, and stack cups. The hardware is a low-cost arm built on the LeRobot open-source stack, affordable enough to sit on a kitchen counter. The unusual part was what was running between the cameras and the motors. Claude was writing the motion policy live in Python. So let's unpack that because the architecture is really important. The dominant approach to teaching robots physical tasks has been to train one large neural network to map what the cameras see directly to what the motor should do. And that requires enormous amounts of demonstration data, humans teleoperating the robot through the task thousands of times until the network learns the mapping. It's expensive, it's slow, and it produces a robot that can do exactly the task it was trained on, but not much else. The approach in the wired piece inverts that. The arm has a small library of primitive actions: grip, lift, rotate, place. Claude is asked in natural language to fold a towel. Claude writes Python code that calls those primitives in sequence. The arm executes the code. When the arm fails, when the towel slips or the cup tips or whatever, Claude reads the failure through the cameras, edits the code, and tries again. So for any of you who have done any type of vibe coding, you know what this is like. Try and try again, iterate, see what breaks, fix it, and try again. It's the same thing applied to the physical world. So this is called code as policy. It's been a research direction for a couple of years now. What changed is that frontier models got good enough at writing this kind of structured code that you can run the loop in a journalist's kitchen with no specialized expertise against a new benchmark called CapX that measures how well models can produce executable robot policies from natural language prompts. Here's what this reveals. The bottleneck in home robotics has been moving. The mechanical hardware has been good enough for some time. The cameras can see, the motors can move precisely enough, the materials are durable. What was missing was a planning layer that could translate human intent into a specific sequence of actions a given body could execute. Frontier models are now good enough at that translation that the bottleneck moves again, to the breadth of the primitive library, the quality of the perception stack, the cost of the hardware. Each of those is improving on its own curve. The natural extension of this is a different shape for what a useful home robot looks like. Hardware that cost a few $1,000s, planning intelligence rented by the hour from a language model, capability that improves every time the underlying model improves, with no retraining of the robot itself. The arm in the wired writer's kitchen isn't a single-purpose appliance. It's a body whose behavior is written freshly every time you ask it to do something different. The next time you ask, Claude just writes new code. Now, the deployment side of this is still early. The wired arm fails plenty, okay? The primitive library is small, but the architecture, that's the part to watch. What used to require a research lab and a venture round is becoming something that a small team can do with simply an open source stack and an API key. All right, shifting away again here. 2 announcements landed this week that look on the surface like separate stories, but are not. 1Password and OpenAI released a credential layer for AI coding agents. Microsoft open-sourced 2 AI red team tools called Rampart and Clarity. Different companies, different parts of the stack, same week. Here's what they share structurally. Both are governance infrastructure shipping inside the same release cycle as the capability it constrains. The 1Password piece addresses a problem that became really visible in late April. A Claude-based coding agent at a startup called Pocket OS deleted a production database in 9 seconds and then wrote that it had violated every principle that it had been given. What made that dangerous wasn't simply the deletion itself. The agent had ambient access to a long-lived production credential baked into its environment. Whatever rule it was given about what not to do, that access didn't really care. So the new release changes the shape of that access. The agent doesn't hold the credential at all. It asks for a credential at the moment it does a specific thing. Very much like an env file for those of you who do any type of coding or repo work, but different because this is about the password being baked somewhere else with 1Password instead. The vault grants scoped access for a single operation, so nothing persists between calls. Every retrieval is also logged. A developer can revoke access without rotating every secret across every project that agent has touched. The Microsoft release does the same kind of work on a different surface, though. Rampart is a red team agent that probes AI development pipelines for prompt injection paths, data exfiltration channels, reward hacking shortcuts. Clarity audits model outputs for policy violations. Both of them wire into continuous integration. Every model build, every prompt template change, every new tool that the agent gains access to triggers an automated security review before the change reaches staging. Work that used to take a red team a full week now runs continuously in the background. Set that against a week ago. 3 independent organizations confirmed Frontier AI completing 32-step autonomous cyber attack chains end-to-end in the same news cycle. That was the offensive capability. The 1Password layer and Microsoft's Rampart and Clarity release are the defensive capability shipping on the same clock, built by the same type of teams, distributed through the same open protocols, and accessible to any organization that wants to deploy it. The standard read of AI safety has been that capability outpaces guardrails, that the offensive surface widens faster than the defensive surface can absorb. But what this week and recent evidence shows is that agentic AI surface, specifically the defensive layer that's being built by the same labs shipping in the same release windows as the capability itself, the protocol, model context protocol, the standard 1Password used, is open. The Microsoft tools are open source. Any team can adopt them. If you build software or if your job involves software that your team didn't write, the credential layer just got smaller. The audit layer just got continuous, and the cost of running an agent with bounded access dropped to roughly the cost of installing 2 new packages. The deployment work on this is still ahead. Adoption takes time, and old systems with ambient credentials don't simply rewire themselves. But the architecture is now public. The tools are now free, and the security floor underneath agentic AI just got measurably higher. Okay, let's pull today's evidence together, and there's one thing very worth saying out loud. A Frontier AI lab workforce moving a governance dispute into a labor framework that has existed since 1975. A triple-agonist molecule moving the metabolic disease curve another 10 percentage points. A humanoid arm folding laundry on code written in conversation. A credential layer shipping inside the agent protocol on the same day that red team automation goes open source. All of that sits within the same news cycle. You can read the friction story and the wonder stories here as opposing currents, but they're the same current. The DeepMind workers in Acas mediation are building the governance framework. The 1Password engineers are building the security floor. The Microsoft team is building the audit layer. The Eli Lilly researchers are building the metabolic disease therapy. The LeRobot stack is building the embodied capability. Every one of them is basically construction work. The era arriving needs frameworks that the prior era didn't build. What today shows is that they are being built by the people closest to the capability, in the cycles where the capability ships, through the institutions that already exist when they fit, and through new ones when they don't. The frontier labs and their workforces, the medical researchers, the open protocol layers, the conciliation services, all of them are moving on the same clock. We'll see you tomorrow.